Extra time, immaculate grid 155 for Labor Day, September 4th, Monday. So today's grid is kind of blah. And so because of that, I'm going to take the opportunity to explain some of the differences across different years and in different eras as far as advanced metrics and how everything is relative to that particular year and to the players that played in that particular year, and why it's difficult to compare advanced metrics across different seasons, across different eras, and how certain statistics might appear to tell one story when used in isolation. So let's just rock the grid today. But first, this is the bonus show for Generations, talking about my sports generations. Apologies, my voice is a little down. I'm under the weather, been for the last couple of days. But the new show dropped on Tuesday. It was on rule changes and how rule changes have changed and how it has changed the fan experience for both Steve and myself. So that dropped on Saturday. New shows every Saturday at noon Pacific time. And then this show, Immaculate Grid Extra Time, is every day at 9 p.m. Pacific time. So we wanted to take a moment to be able to talk about some of these things. And we're going to use one of our favorite players of all time, Ichiro. And we're going to actually compare him to Pete Rose. So I think it's a pretty decent comparison just to give you kind of a flavor of how these things have to be taken into context. And then when they're used very lazily, in my opinion, or even sloppily in articles, or when other people do different types of podcasts or videos, I want to just make sure that everybody has a very good understanding, foundational understanding of how these things are all relative. And then that way, that might give you a little bit better perspective on what you're looking at or listening to. But here's today's grid. From left to right on the columns, we've got the Chicago White Sox, we have the Seattle Mariners, and we have 100 RBI season for batting. And then for the rows, top to bottom, we have the Chicago Cubs, we have the Los Angeles Dodgers, and then we have Detroit Rock City, the Motor City Kitties, the Detroit Tigers. So with that, let's just go top to bottom, left to right, top to bottom. Let's get this out of the way because we really want to get to this discussion on advanced stats. So for Sox and Cubs, we went Ron Santo. For those that don't recall, Santo, and we were just looking at his stats the other day because we've been doing a bunch of stuff on Gold Glove. But Santo, his very last year, he had that rando year where he went to the South Side. You have Jamie Moyer, 35% here. So Santo was 4%. And now you have in the middle, top middle, you have Seattle and Cubs. You have Jamie Moyer, 35%. Moyer started off as a Cub, would eventually go to Seattle, would finish off, I believe, with the Phillies. He's that guy that pitched 20 plus years in the league and was just, when you say league average, it makes it sound like it's a negative. But as a left-hander playing that long and being maybe just slightly above league average, that's pretty elite. And so a lot of terms get thrown around and it makes it sound like it's a negative thing. But to be able to say that, man, I was, league average or better for 20 some seasons, how many people can say that in the world and during the whole history of Major League Baseball? There aren't that many. So Jamie Moyer is here at 35%. Then 100 RBI season and batting. I just wanted to flex. I went Bill Buckner here. He did it one time as a Cub. Bill Buckner, there's been a lot of people that have done it. I don't know, maybe I'll do it as well. But Bill Buckner was a 300 plus hitter, was a Gold Glover. He was really solid with the Cubs. And it was much later in his career until he was a Red Sox. And so a lot of people kind of remember him for that 86 World Series. And there's been a lot of stuff done on this, but Bill Buckner was a very solid player. Again, kind of like Moyer. But I want Buckner here just to flex. Then for the middle row from left to right, we have Steve Sax. So for the Sox and Doyer. So Sax would go to the Yankees and then he would get traded. So he'd go to the Yankees as a free agent and then he would be traded by the Yankees to the White Sox. And we got a little anecdote that we've told before. It's from a friend of ours. So I'm not sure if it's true, but my buddy is, he's been around. He's a longtime Los Angeles fixture. He's in the arts and entertainment industry, and he's got a lot of connections. So I think that it's true. But we'll save that here for just a moment. Then for Seattle and Doyer, we have, Hackman again. This is 2 days in a row that we've been able to go Hackman. He comes in at 0.2%. He actually started out as a Doyer, went to the Houstons and then the Giants. And I looked it up. That 1987 season, all the way until the end of May, he was batting 360. And then his average would have kind of this free fall. He would still be hitting over 300 by the All-Star break, but he would finish the season at like 289. But he was way above 360 for quite a while and held it all the way to the end of May. So I looked that up the other day. Then for the last column, far right column, middle row for 100 RBI season in Doyer, we went Pedro Guerrero. I'm Pedro Guerrero, 2%. And so allegedly, according to my buddy, Guerrero was asked, so when you're in the field, what are you thinking? And he allegedly told the LA Times reporter, please God, don't let the ball come to me. And then the reporter slyly asked, well, then what's the second thing that you're thinking? And he goes, please God, don't let him hit it to sacks. So that team was kind of known for booting the ball around. They would end up getting Alfredo Griffin to kind of shore up the shortstop position. They had no shortage of first basemen. Mike Marshall, Mickey Hatcher. I mean, there was a lot of first basemen, after Garvey left. So there was a lot of revolving door. Eric Karros would eventually show up from UCLA. But, Guerrero played first. He played third. He played outfield. He would go on to the Cardinal. But, Pedro Guerrero here, 2%. Then in the bottom row, Sox and Detroit Rock City, I went Maglio Ordonez, 35%. Quite frankly, I couldn't think of anybody else. I went with the most popular answer. That's all I had. And then Seattle and Detroit Rock City, Jeremy Bonderman, he was part of that 2006 Detroit team. They had Kenny Rogers and Verlander on that staff, and Bonderman actually was solid for that team. And then here's the bottom right-hand square, Detroit and 100 RBI season. It just sheer serendipity. My buddy Tony and I both went Mickey Tettleton here, and I, it's just like, hey, I was just thinking Tettleton. Tettleton was a catcher, was a designated hitter, played a little bit of first base and a little bit of outfield. Started out as an A, and then eventually make his way. I think he played with Texas and would make his way to Detroit, and he would actually have several 30 home run seasons in a row. I think 3 or 4, and he would have over 100 RBI once or twice. But Mickey Tettleton here, 4.5%. So let's go ahead and just finish everything off. This is where we're at. So this is what I really want to talk about. I want to talk about Ichiro. So Ichiro's career OPS plus is 107, which means that he was 7% better. So that's on base plus slugging. And the OPS plus is normalized for the park that you hit in. So at 107, that means he's just barely above league average. But Ichiro's was just amazing. I mean, his seasons are just crazy, and it doesn't do justice. That statistic does not do him justice. And part of that reason, my theory, is a couple of things. One, he was still hitting in the era where we still had a lot of PEDs. So let's take his first 10 years. His first season was 2001. So you can see we took his first 10 years, 2001 to 2010. And we took the AL OPS. So this is how OPS plus is calculated. So you take the league, you take your on-base percentage and divide it by the on-base percentage of the league. Then you add your slugging percentage divided by the slugging percentage of the league. And you multiply that by 100, and then you normalize that for the part that you hit in. So I'll talk about what that means here in just a moment. But let's just start off. So first off, we took the AL OPS from 2001 to 2010, And then we took the mean, the max, and the min. So the minimum OPS was 734 during that period. And strangely enough, it's 2010. So you're like 30 points, almost 30 points lower in 2010, which presumably starts to correlate with kind of weeding out a lot of the PED users. So that's just an assumption. It's not fact by any means, but just from the data, you can see it dropped 30 points from 2009 to 2010. And the average OPS was 760. So pretty solid. Pretty solid AL 10-year average. So what we do is, how does that compare to Ichiro's? So Ichiro, his average was 806. So pretty solid. I mean, that's a pretty solid OPS plus. And bear in mind, we're going to talk about it here in a moment, but I mean, Ichiro had a season where he batted 372. I mean, his first 10 years in the league are just nuts. And of course, his first year, 2001, he won the MVP and the Rookie of the Year in the same season. So now if you take his standard OPS, which is basically just taking his OPS divided by the average AL OPS, he comes out to an average of 106. But OPS plus is actually determined by the park and normalized for the park that you're in. So his actual OPS during that period of time is actually 117. And so this is one of the reasons why it's very difficult even to compare season over season. You can have the exact same statistics from one season to the next. You can have the same hits, same average, same OBA, same slugging, same total bases, everything. And your OPS plus is going to be slightly higher or lower depending on the rest of the league because you are compared against the rest of the league. So what does that all mean? So here you have a factor. So basically, Ichiro, 2001, he played his entire Seattle career in Safeco Field, which is pretty much widely assumed and presumed, and data suggests will show that it is more of a pitcher's park than a hitter's park. So basically, in effect, all of Ichiro's each year OPS plus standard value is adjusted by as much as 10% or more. So the lowest year it was only adjusted by 3%, and the highest year it was adjusted by 16%. And that's based on the actual number of runs and the base, or runs and the actual OPS is the better way to say it, in that particular park as compared to everywhere else. So everything is relative. Everything is compared to a standard. So you take the standard across all of the teams and then you adjust it accordingly to what actually happened at that particular park. And the math is actually very easy. It's just the handling of all the data. So that's why you have to do it kind of with a computer. It's not like the math, it's just adding, subtracting, dividing, multiplying. It's all simple math, but it's just a massive amount of data to be able to consolidate it and correlate it and come up with these numbers. But in general, his OPS plus is 10% higher than his standard OPS because he was hitting in a park that was less conducive to, extra base hits, less conducive to hits in general. So his career, as we mentioned, he had an OPS plus of 107. So now let's compare what Ichiro would have been if he played from 1971 to 1980. Oh, look at this. The minimum is only 649 versus the minimum of 734. So that's 85 points difference. The mean is 704 versus 760. So 56 points difference. So it's quite a bit lower in the AL from 71 to 80. So if you transcribe his same numbers from his standard OPS, which is just taking his actual OPS, dividing it by the league OPS for that particular year, his average goes from 116.1 to 114.6, so an 8.5 point jump. Then if we were to use the same factor, now, of course, this would assume that Safeco would play the same way relative to the other AL teams that particular season. And also remember, 1969, we went to the divisions. We had two sets of expansion. We had the Seattle Mariners. We had the Kansas City Royals. We had what would be the Senators to the Rangers and the Brewers. So we'd have four teams basically in expansion starting in the late 60s into the early 70s. So that could be also partially why, that OPS was down. But again, Ichiro is still the same player. Just because the rest of the league is down, he's just being compared to the rest of the league. Not saying that he's better or worse as the player that he was, but he is different as compared to the other players in that particular league on that particular year. So then his OPS plus jumps from 117 to 127. So that's a 10-point swing. That's an 8% increase. And Ichiro is still the same player. It's just comparing him to a different era. So when we look at WAR across eras, when we look at WAR across, and of course this is wins above replacement, when we look at those numbers across eras, when we look at them across positions, when we look at them across leagues, you can't really, from a quantitative perspective, use them as the same number, because they're not. It's all relative. Now, if you're using them qualitatively and if you're using them as a mosaic, totally fine. But if you're trying to use those arguments as absolutes, you're actually using the math incorrectly. And again, Ichiro didn't change. He's still the same player from 2001 to 2010. We're just comparing him to the league from 71 to 80. And he just is much more favorable in those years. And Bill James even talks about this. What he talks about is that the difference between the greatest players and the worst players in baseball as we go back in time is a much larger standard deviation. So if you take the mean and you take one standard deviation to the left, one standard deviation to the right, you come up with a 68% distribution curve. So 68% of all the data is going to fall in that particular spot between those three sets of data, to the left, to the middle, and to the right. And so when you look at that, 68% of all, let's say you have 100 hitters, 68 of those hitters will sit in that spot. Well, the standard deviation is greater, meaning, so if the average OPS, as an example, was 750, and you might be 850 for the better players, and you'd only be 650 for the worse. Whereas today, it's a much smaller distribution because all the players are really great. I mean, they talk about it, the 25th guy on the bench, he's still a great baseball player. He's just not great as compared to guy number one. But the 25th baseball player today, quite frankly, is probably better than the 13th or 12th or maybe even 5th or 6th player from 40 years ago. We don't exactly know, and that's one of these reasons why some of these numbers are hard to really compare and contrast. I mean, they give us an idea and it gives us a starting point, but they're not absolute. But just taking Ichiro's same exact statistics, and he appears that, he's 10 points higher in OPS plus, and he hasn't got another hit or anything like that. So here's the last we're going to leave with you. So Ichiro versus Pete Rose. Ichiro, 311 batting average, 355 on base, 402 slugging, and an OPS plus of 107. Rose had a 303 average, so 8 points lower, but he had a 375 on base, so 20 points higher. And his OPS his on base, his slugging is only 7 points higher, 409. But his OPS plus is 118, so 11 points higher. So here's Rose's highest OPS season, 1969. He batted 348. He had a 428 on base average and a 512 slugging. He had 120 runs, 218 hits, 60 extra base hits, of which 16 were home runs, 82 RBI, 7 stolen bases. He had a 158 OPS plus, and he had 321 total bases. He played 156 games. Ichiro batted 372 to 348, so 24 points higher. His on-base average is 414. So actually, he was actually 14 points less than Rose, and his slugging was 455 compared to Rose's 512. Ichiro had 101 runs. He had 262 hits. 262. That's insane. I mean, he dwarfs Rose's career high, I think, is 230. He had 30, but he only had 37 extra base hits, of which were 8 home runs. So he had 23 fewer extra base hits. He had 60 RBI. He had 36 stolen bases, and he had a 130 OPS plus. But here's the difference. He had 320 total bases to Rose's 321. So he was one off. And he played 161 games. Rose played 156. So slight difference there. The OPS of the 1969 NL, now that's the year of the pitcher, mind you, is 688. So Rose was 158 OPS plus. So he was 58% better than the average. Now, granted, pitchers were hitting, but if a pitcher was doing 0, right? So if I have 9 players and 1 did nothing, I got no hits, 0. Zeros across the board, that would be a difference of 11%. Assuming that the pitchers did absolutely nothing. Now, at this point in time, most pitchers are proficient. They're not good, but they're not as terrible as they are today. And of course, today we have universal DH as of the last year. So 688 OPS 1969 NL. In Ichiro's 2004 season, this is the one that we're using, the OPS was 771. I mean, it is 93 points higher. 83 points, excuse me, I can't do math. It is a 12.1 difference. So if all the pitchers in the NL in 1969 did nothing, absolutely 0, the difference should be 11%, right? 1 out of 9 is 11.1%. But the difference is 12.1%. That's how much difference it is from the OPS of 2004 to 1969. And instead of having a 130 OPS plus, Ichiro's OPS should be about a 145, 146. So 15 points higher, and the disparity between him and Rose not as much at 158. So when we look at OPS plus, when we look at WAR, when we look at all these advanced statistics, we have to be careful on what we're looking at and how we are explaining it, because from year to year it changes, from position to position it changes. And if I'm going to take 2 players that kind of played across the same era and the same seasons, the seasons that they overlap, you can absolutely compare them fairly easily. But as soon as you get into seasons where they played and another did not, or vice versa, the argument and the numbers are going to change quite a bit. And sometimes they might be negligible and you can still make a reasonable assumption or argument. But the reality is, within years, everything changes and everything is relative. So when you go look at a full season of stats and you look at a particular league, guess what? The OPS plus for the whole league is 100, because that's what everything is based off of, 100. And then you'll see the teams are going to be slightly higher or slightly lower. And then you're going to see some adjustments based off of the respective park that they play in. So we wanted to get this off our chest, and we wanted to show it numerically. So when people go, well, Ichiro's OPS plus is only 107. Well, Ichiro played in the season where Bonds hit 73 home runs. So now, granted, that was in the NL, but in the AL, it wasn't like you didn't have Giambi, Mark McGwire. You didn't have, of course, well, McGwire at this point is in the NL, but, you get my point. Griffey Jr. I mean, there's guys mashing the ball, just mashing the ball. And Ichiro's getting compared to those guys from an OPS perspective. And you really should be looking at it. It's like, dude, he hit 372 in 2004. He had 262 hits. So as you can tell, I'm getting a little apoplectic. All right. This is extra time. It is Immaculate Grid. It is grid 155 for Labor Day. Man, I'm starting to get better, but you wouldn't know by that cough. All right. Have a great evening. We'll see you here tomorrow.